Hey everybody, welcome back to Sax Tuition on YouTube. My name's Jeremy. You know, when you're starting the saxophone for the first time, you're confronted with a really challenging task, and that is buying a beginner saxophone. And after you've done a quick Google search and you've been shocked by some of the prices out there, you're left wondering, what should I really be looking for in a beginner saxophone? Well, in this video, we're going to be answering that very question, and I'm going to be giving you some specific recommendations on what saxophones to buy. Now, just quickly, guys, if you're about to start the saxophone for the first time and you're looking for a way to learn from home, check out the Sax Tuition Beginner Series. It's a complete package for learning the saxophone online. Best of all, you can check out lesson 1 for free on YouTube, and I've put the link in the description below. So let's get into it. So let's start with what's important when you buy a beginner saxophone. And first of all, we've got ergonomics, meaning how comfortable is it to play? Now, you may not know this, but the keys on the saxophone are offset deliberately to match the shape of the hand. And in the 1950s, a company called Selmer released the legendary Mark VI, which you could consider as the final form of the modern sax. And it really set the standard for ergonomics and playability for virtually every saxophone that followed. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't differences in the ergonomics of modern saxophones, though. The best brands put a lot of thought into the design of their saxophones and ensure that they feel as comfortable to play as possible. Another point that I'll make under the heading of ergonomics is weight. Now, when I picked up a Selmer Mark VI for the first time, I was actually shocked by how light it was. And in my opinion, the best saxophones out there, be they student or professional, share that same kind of lightness. In my experience, it's generally the cheaper, lower quality instruments that tend to be heavier. And of course, playing a lighter instrument feels more comfortable to have around your neck and allows you to play for longer without getting fatigued. The next most important factor in deciding a beginner saxophone is intonation, meaning tuning. Now, when you start the saxophone for the first time, developing a good sense of intonation is so important, and it goes hand in hand with developing your embouchure. So the last thing that you want to be doing is fighting your instrument at the same time. Now, unfortunately, there are brand new shiny saxophones out there that don't particularly play in tune, which is why intonation has to be a factor we consider when selecting a beginner sax. Now, the third major consideration for buying a beginner saxophone has to be build quality. And this actually goes hand in hand with ergonomics and intonation. Nobody wants to visit the woodwind repairer every few months when all of a sudden you can't play a low D anymore. And if you live somewhere rural, there may not even be a repairer close by to go to. So higher build quality means less servicing, higher resale value, and more wonderful years with your instrument. Well, I think that about covers it. You know what? Actually, I think there is one other thing. Price. Now, for the purpose of this video, I'll be looking at saxophones right around the $500 US mark for an alto saxophone. If we go much more than that, then I know that really prices a lot of beginners out of the market. And if we go much lower than that, then it's not really reasonable to expect a saxophone that fits all the criteria that we've laid out. I'm also aware that when you're starting an instrument for the first time, you're taking a gamble on yourself, a gamble that you're going to enjoy it and you're going to want to continue. So the prospect of spending thousands of dollars on a new instrument and going straight for a professional model just doesn't sound like the greatest idea. Now, before I give you some advice on some specific saxophones to buy, I have to address the elephant in the room, because you might be sitting there banging your head against the desk saying, Jeremy, how can you not address the most important thing? Tone. Surely how a saxophone sounds has to be a major consideration in deciding what saxophone to buy. And the truth that surprises almost every newcomer to the saxophone is the instrument itself, the saxophone that you're playing on, only accounts for a very small percentage of what you actually sound like. Most of your tone and what makes you sound unique on the saxophone comes from your embouchure, meaning the shape of the mouth when you play. It also comes from breath support and just some of your physical characteristics. Of the part of your sound that does come from your equipment, most actually comes from your mouthpiece and reed combination, and so you can think about the saxophone as being the glue that just holds it all together. Now certainly the saxophone can color the sound, and it can push it a little brighter or darker. It can also add some focus to your sound, but it's just that as a small percentage of your whole sound, it's really not a major determining factor in buying a beginner saxophone. So if the ergonomics feel right, the intonation is good, and the build quality is high, a good tone is just a natural byproduct of those three things. Okay, so now we get into the fun part, recommending some saxophones. So we've set our budget at around $500 and the first thing I'm gonna do is to rule out some of the very cheap, brightly colored eBay saxophones. Now, it's not to say that there aren't a few diamonds in the rough here, but overall, they're very difficult to recommend since the brands and the models are constantly changing. And in my first-hand experience with them, of the 4 major selling points we're looking at, they really only satisfy one, and that's price. Now, if you're interested in learning more about these saxophones, you can check out my Pink Sax versus Selmer video on the Sax Tuition YouTube channel. Now, the second group of saxophones we're going to rule out are vintage saxophones, meaning any saxophones made before about 1980. Why? Well, the main reason you would buy a vintage sax is if you're after a particular tone. But since we're starting from scratch here and we've established that your technique is the most important part of your tone, venturing out and getting a vintage saxophone should really be left until you've got some more experience under your belt. Plus, most of the vintage saxophones you can buy for around $500 tend to be the forgotten ones, the saxophones that aren't very well known, usually because the intonation and the ergonomics and the build quality were never really that great in the first place. So we've ruled out a ton of saxophones already, but now it's time for me to give you my number one personal recommendation, and that is to buy a second-hand Yamaha. Now, I know a lot of professional saxophonists who started learning on a Yamaha student model sax and kept that original instrument to either use as a backup if their main sax is in the shop, or even continue to use as their primary instrument. Now, on Craigslist, eBay, Gumtree, whatever your local classifieds are, you're bound to find a second-hand Yamaha alto saxophone for around that $500 price range. Bearing in mind, of course, that the tenors can run a little bit more expensive, but overall, the Yamaha saxophones tick every box in a great beginner saxophone. They're very well made, they feel great to play, they're also a little bit lighter than most beginner saxophones, and they play very in tune. Basically, any model Yamaha saxophone will do, but to make things easier, I've put up the specific student models on the screen for your reference. And in case you're interested from a tone perspective, they have quite a bright sound, so they're ideal for more modern styles of music. Now, before I wrap the video up, I have to give an honorable mention to another saxophone, the Jean Paul AS400. At just under $500 brand new, it fits our budget perfectly. And whilst I haven't actually had a chance to try it out myself, I've had a number of people in the Sax Tuition community actually write to me to say how much they love using this saxophone. Now, there's not a ton of information out there about the Jean Paul company itself, but based on what I could find, the company is based in Florida and the instruments are made in China. Now, just to quickly point out, I'm not sponsored by Jean Paul in any way, but I thought I'd just mention them since they've been getting so many great reviews online. So with the caveat that I haven't actually tried the Jean Paul yet myself, if you're looking to buy a saxophone brand new, it looks like that could be a really fantastic option. Now, I've left a link to that Jean Paul saxophone in the description below, so you can check that out. And I've also set up a page on the Sax Tuition website, which I've linked to below, which basically just summarizes all the information in this video, gives you those model numbers that I talked about, and I can update that as we go along with any new saxophone recommendations as they come about. Well, that's it, guys. If you've got any questions about anything in this video, please do leave them in the comments section below. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up, and of course subscribe to the Sax Tuition YouTube channel for more great saxophone content. Thanks again for watching, guys, and I'll see you all again soon.